Today we're going to try to get this old lawnmower running. The story behind this mower is I had it when I was at a different residence. We had a big enough yard to actually need a riding mower, and it was running a little off then and needed a tune-up. Then I moved back home for a bit, and my dad actually said that he was going to be taking this. So what he did is for about 2 years it sat out in his driveway uncovered, and now that I bought a house, he just gave it back and said, I don't want this in my driveway anymore. So now we have a tractor that definitely does not run and is in need of some repair.
Now with this riding mower, I really wanted to do a full series of how to troubleshoot and diagnose small engines and get them running, and then from there say, okay, here's how you work on cars using those same principles. But the more I got into it with this thing, I realized I just couldn't possibly cover everything with how much was wrong with this, and I had literally 6 hours of footage, most of which was time-lapse. Instead, what I'll do is I'll have a recap of the biggest lessons learned and what you should be taking away from this. Now, the two most important things to take away from this, it doesn't matter what you're selling. It could be a house, it could be a riding mower, it could be a car. Does not matter. The biggest things to take away are that first, pretty sells, and second, that nobody wants to buy somebody else's project. Starting with pretty sells, one of the very first things you can see with this mower is how much dirt and grime and grease is just caked onto this thing, and you can really tell that it's been sitting outside for years. Whether or not it's true, the message that this sends to a potential buyer is, okay, if they didn't care about this enough to even clean it off, then why would they have treated it well while they owned it? Why would they have maintained it properly? They clearly do not care about this thing. And like I said, it doesn't matter whether or not you did care about it. Obviously, a mower is going to get some dirt and grime on it. However, this thing isn't even clean within reason. It was definitely neglected and it shows, and as a result, a buyer is immediately going to have that thought, even if it isn't a conscious thought. As a result of that, the very first thing you'll see me do once I get everything stripped down is to clean off the frame, scrape off all the dirt, cover the whole thing with degreaser, and just try to get this thing semi-presentable. I initially listed this for sale without even cleaning it off, and I got no bites at all. And then I just went back and I cleaned it, took some new fresh photos with it cleaned off, and at that point I got some interest in it, but I still couldn't get anybody to actually show up and take it away. And that brings me to my second point, that nobody wants to buy a project, especially somebody else's project. Now, there's a bunch of reasons why that's true, the biggest being, one, the level of risk that goes into buying something like that. You don't know how that work was done. You don't know how good this person is at fixing these sort of things. You don't know if the engine will run eventually anyhow, or if the engine itself is shot. There's just too many variables. And two, people are pressed for time. They don't want to take on more things that they have to take care of when they already have a laundry list on their plate. Doesn't matter who you are, you probably have some things going on that you have to take care of, and unless you're getting a substantial enough discount in the price to account for that time that it's going to take you to fix this, and to account for that risk level of whether or not it's even going to work in the end, unless you get a substantial enough discount, it's not going to be worth buying for most people. So in this case, what that means for me is that cleaning it off is the first thing I'm doing, and the second is trying to reduce that risk for a potential buyer as much as I can so that they're more likely to buy it. This brings me to the next lesson that we're going to have with repairing this, and that is risk mitigation or risk walk down. Now, this applies to not just this project, but literally any project or program. It could be a professional one or a personal one. What you're trying to do is take away as much of those risks and variables as you can for the least amount of money. So let's say, for example, that this tractor is $500. It's not, but for argument's sake it is, but it only costs that much if it runs and it's in perfect presentable condition. Now, let's say by comparison, if it runs perfectly, but it's still visually ugly, it sells for $300. Now, let's say it's more of the current scenario where it doesn't run and it's not visually presentable, and you can sell it for $50 to $75. Basically, you're balancing the amount of money you're putting into it to how much you will get back. And the goal here is that you want to get as much back as you can for the resources, both time and money, that are going into it to maximize your ROI or your return on investment. Now, as for how it rolls into the risk mitigation or the risk walk down, what you're looking to do with those is try to eliminate as many of those risk items or those variables that would prevent you from getting to that next phase of the project or that next selling point, in this case, the next tier of pricing, by taking away the biggest risk items you can by prioritizing which items you tackle first to try to mitigate as much of that risk as possible. Typically, the way you do this is you balance the cost to mitigate something versus how big of a risk item it is. So in this case, where my biggest risk is whether or not the engine will run again, the first thing I wanted to do was make sure the engine wasn't seized and that the internal components could actually turn. So what I did for free is I put a socket on the crank that spins on the engine, and I just made sure everything would rotate freely because that made sure the mechanical components could physically turn still. The second biggest risk item is what you just saw me do, and that was replacing the battery. Because this sat for 4 years, the battery that was on it was extremely dead, and obviously you need some sort of electrical spark to not only start the engine, but to keep it running. Now the battery was only $20-something. I want to say it was like $27 that I bought it for. So price-wise, it was one of the cheaper things I could purchase. Obviously a new engine is several $100s, but on top of that, it mitigated the most risk of what was going to be wrong, because I feared that the electrical system and not having that charge was going to be the next highest risk item. Now I'm going to jump to where I first attempted to start and crank over the engine, because that was such a huge moment of risk mitigation because of those reasons that I just said.
I'm going to turn the key. Every switch is in the correct position for it to start. So that's turning over. That sounds good. I'll get some fresh gas in here. I'll put some starting fluid in it, and then we are going to see if I can actually get it started.
So like I said, it does need other things, including fresh fuel. However, if you resolve the fuel issue and you put fresh gas in it, but you don't resolve those other items, at the end of the day, the mower's still not going to run. Although the fuel is cheaper, on its own, it isn't sufficient enough to get this going. That's why I changed the battery and made sure the engine could turn over first.
Make sure it still goes. Oh, that smells.
So the engine now runs, and that was our biggest risk item, and the next risk item is getting it to the point that it is a well-functioning mower, even if it isn't good to look at. The front right wheel, the steering was seized on it, and it was locked at an angle, and I was trying to get that freed up next, because that was the next biggest item functionally that was wrong with it. You can't really drive a mower if you can't turn it in any direction except the one it's currently set to. That's why I prioritized trying to get this wheel unseized prior to doing things like sharpening the blades, replacing the belts, and all of that, because at the end of the day, you can ride a mower that has dull blades or worn out belts, but you can't ride a mower that doesn't steer at all. Now, despite my best efforts of torching this, soaking it with penetrating oils and WD-40, I couldn't get this thing to turn, so at the end of the day, I knew this was beyond my skill capability, and that's going to be the next takeaway from this. Sometimes giving up on a project is the right answer if you don't have the skills, the tools, the capability, or the funds that will make it worthwhile to finish the project. With all that said, here's the final lesson of the riding mower.
We're now going to take a final look at the riding mower project to try to get that closed out. And as you can see, oh, geez, that's a little weird. So this is what I sold the mower for, $20. That is also less than the cost of the battery that I purchased for it, and less than all the other expenses such as carb cleaner, brake cleaner, whatever degreaser that I used, and any other miscellaneous bolts and nuts and stuff that I had lying around. But as you can see, just getting rid of that freed up almost half my garage again. What it really comes down to is I took about a $30 to $40 hit on what I bought versus what I sold the mower for. However, when I looked at what it still needed and how locked that front right corner was, there was just no way I could repair it for a reasonable amount of money given my level of skill and the tools I have available. It would have cost me more to get that mower running in 100% condition than it would have been worth to sell, and because I can't use it here, it has no utility value to me either. So today's lesson is sometimes the right thing to do is just take the loss and move on. You do have to be able to know when you are in over your head, and I was definitely in over my head with this project. If I did not get the vehicle running, nobody would have even come and taken it for free. There was no way I would have been able to offload it and get my garage space back given the condition that it was in. So even the guy who picked it up with it running, he bought the whole thing for spare parts because he has another one of the same model. So we took a hit, but it's okay. We have most of the garage back, and I don't have a stupid mower in my way. So that is the conclusion of the mower project. It is out of the frickin' way and out of my house and out of my life and no longer my problem. Thank you for watching.